Hello and welcome to this video where I will try to explain the phenomenon of INFJ rage and what causes it. And I'm going to do so while using the 2003 movie Dogville by Lars von Trier as an example. Before I start analyzing and dissecting the movie and the meaning for the phenomenon of INFJ rage, I just want to say that naturally this video contains a lot of spoilers regarding the story and the ending of the movie. So if you haven't watched it yet, maybe you should pause this video and do so right now and later return. So let's start with me giving you a brief summary of the storyline of the movie. And because I really suck at this, I wrote this down before I started making this video. So, what is this movie all about? A young woman named Grace, which is played by Nicole Kidman, by the way, which is kind of funny because just as the character Grace in this movie, Nicole Kidman is an INFJ. Mysteriously appears in an American village and needs shelter. One of the inhabitants, a young writer and philosopher called Tom, kind of takes her under his wing and convinces the other people to let her stay if she offers to work for them and help with diverse tasks. And at first this seems like a reasonable compromise. She's always kind and helpful and the people treat her with respect. But then as time goes by and they find out that she's searched for by the police and seems to hold some kind of secret, they begin to demand more and more of her and treat her worse and worse, to the point where they start to abuse and humiliate her in horrible ways and keep her like a slave. And even Tom, who seemed to be on her side and the voice of reason and morality, ends up betraying her, which is not the final ending of this movie, because that's something I'm going to talk about in the process of this video as I go along to explain the phenomenon of INFJ rage. So the first thing worth noticing and talking about, I think, is Grace's attitude in all of, or throughout all of this, throughout her ordeal, so to say. Because even as like in the beginning, she naturally is grateful for even being allowed to stay and like accepting the idea that she has to give something in return to be allowed to stay there and provided for in some kind of way. But even as the people start to treat her worse and worse and demand more and more, she still comes from this place of grace and trying to understand them and make excuses for them, which is something INFJs do way too much, like excusing and rationalizing other people's shitty behavior. And another aspect of this is the idea of wanting to be the bigger person at any cost. You know, thinking like just because other people are mean or cruel doesn't mean that I have to become like them and you know, as a spiritual person you'd say, revert to the same low vibrational energies and ways of behavior, basically. And this is also a trap that especially, you know, spiritually inclined INFJs fall into a lot. The idea of having to be the bigger person at any cost and not being allowed to express righteous anger. Because even as Grace naturally starts to get irritated and offended by the way she's treated, she suppresses the feelings of anger and of also of pain that this invokes in her, because she's also desperately trying to hold on to the idea or the construct basically that after all, or somewhere deep inside, they have to be good people, right? That those let's call it weird behaviors are just like superficial confusions or temporary mistakes or flaws, and not something that is actually a part of their character. So all in all, it's this kind of martyrdom and stoicism that she displays, and at the same time a weird form of arrogance, as they discuss in the movie, which is a very interesting discussion between Grace and her father near the end of the movie. That that make Grace endure all of this without ever really trying to fight her oppressors. But then in the end, after Grace had this conversation with her father, who, as we find out, is some kind of gangster boss she ran away from at the beginning of the movie because they had some kind of argument about the cruel and criminal ways in which he and his people behave. And she actually has this moment of insight and clarity, basically overcoming her, that the people of this village are just equally as evil as her father's people, and that or maybe even more so, as they portrayed themselves to be, nice and decent people, and turned out to be so much worse than she could have ever expected. The INFJ rage suddenly breaks out of her, basically with all the force and intensity that it is known for. And she has the most cruel and horrible revenge that one could think of. And it turns out to be completely disproportionate and destructive, as she decides to let her father's people kill all inhabitants of the village, including the children. And what I find really remarkable is this moment of, let's call it, transformation that happens before Grace makes this decision. And I want to quote, the things that the narrator of the story in the movie says at that time. I shortened this a little bit and left out like 2 sentences or something that were not that important. Okay. How could she ever hate them for what was at bottom merely their weakness? She would probably have done things like those that had befallen her if she had lived in one of these houses. Would she not, in all honesty, have done the same as Chuck and Vera and Ben and Mrs. Hanson and Tom, and all these people in their houses? Grace paused, and while she did, the clouds gathered and let the moonlight through. And Dogville underwent another of those little changes of light. It was as if the light, previously so merciful and faint, finally refused to cover up for the town any longer. The light now penetrated every unevenness and flaw in the buildings and in the people. And all of a sudden she knew the answer to her question all too well. If she had acted like them, she could not have defended a single one of her actions, and could not have condemned them harshly enough. It was as if her sorrow and pain finally assumed their rightful place. No, what they had done was not good enough. And if one had the power to put it to rights, it was one's duty to do so. For the sake of other towns, for the sake of humanity, and not least for the sake of the human being that was Grace herself. So, to sum up the message of this video, I think that INFJ RAGE is basically, in 99.9% of cases, just some kind of righteous anger that has been accumulated inside oneself for way too long, and has not been expressed like in the right amount at the right time and towards the right people, and then all of a sudden bursts out in full intensity, and sometimes also, at the wrong moment, or kind of used against the wrong people, even though not necessarily in the movie. And yeah, to counteract this, it's extremely important that INFJs learn to be very self-aware and realize when, let's say, that point of no return is crossed, and very important boundaries are violated, and there are no more excuses for the other person, because no matter what they might have been through in life, it doesn't give them the right to treat other people like shit. And this is a very important lesson for INFJs to learn, and also, as I said, to express their feelings in maybe more moderate ways and at the right time, and not just like storing it all up. Yeah, and that's basically all I wanted to say about this topic. And as always, feel free to comment. And till the next time, bye.